Arundhati Bhattacharya joins us now to talk a little bit about the future of the State Bank of India, about how the bank continues to contribute in so many fields to the day-to-day life of millions of Indians. Thank you, ma'am, very much for speaking to us. So State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur, Travancore, Patiala, Mysore, Hyderabad, and the Bhartiya Mahila Bank, 37 trillion rupees in assets. It sounds incredibly impressive, but some of your critics would actually say that the SBI has been a great bank. It's been a superb bank. Why do you want to add to the risk portfolio of SBI?
Well, actually speaking, the risk that was residing in these banks was also ours. As you know, out of these 5 subsidiary banks, 2 of them were wholly owned by us. Yeah. Another 3 were partly, but majority owned by us. So if they were running a risk, actually speaking, the risk came back to us as owners, because we would have to keep supplying capital to ensure that that risk didn't drive these banks down. In fact, I think the risk is now lessened, because in the mother bank itself, we have put in the last 2-3 years, huge amount of work to ensure that the risk management practices are cutting edge, are some of the best, are technology based. Now, to do the same in these 5 institutions was taking a lot of time, effort and money. And it doesn't make sense to, replicate your actions 6 times over. And therefore, it was more and more important to get this entire entity together so that we would have much better controls on risks, on productivities, on efficiencies, cut out the overlaps and really, streamline the operations.
70,000 employees are going to now come into, or have come into the SBI fold.
That's right.
With them, there are their various unions. Rationalizing your human resources is going to take a significant period of time. Is there also a potential problem?
I don't really think so. Though, if you ask me, the HR issue is the most difficult one to handle in a merger of this sort. The reason for that is all of these people are coming with a certain kind of culture which they have imbibed from their organizations. So you're putting together the culture of 7 organizations and you are expecting them all to act as one. Not easy. Yeah. But we believe it is something that can and will be tackled. In fact, one of the things that we have done from day one is to actually use technology to be able to address each and every person. So I have written individually to everybody. I have done webcasts, which I hope everybody has been able to listen to. Not only that, we have created portals to enable them to directly contact us in case they have a personal problem. One of the major pain points in all of these people were the fear that they would get transferred pan-India, because we have pan-India presence, whereas most of these other organizations, they were more regionally focused. But the way we have tried to get across that problem is to create a portal where we have allowed them to put options for their transfers. So they're being told you can give 3 options and we'll post you accordingly. And all the people who have given their options, I think at least 95 to 98% of those, we've been able to manage within the 3 options that they have given them. So I think, the HR issue is also something where technology has been a great help to us. And we will continue to leverage that in order to ensure that they understand the DNA of the organization that they have joined and that they become fully capable employees of this bigger entity.
So again, a lot of people would say consolidation is all very well, but what about competition? Why shouldn't there be more banks rather than fewer banks? Rather than one monolithic organization, shouldn't there be more competition? How would you respond?
See, one thing today we have to be aware is, as I told you, the rate of change has really picked up. Therefore, if you have very small organizations, their ability to respond to change is lower. Their ability to spend on things like technology and risk is also lower. And therefore, their ability to respond to the emerging challenges would not be that much as would happen in a bigger entity. And therefore, while small players are fine for niche plays, but if you really want to be a pan-India bank, given the state of the Indian economy, the fact that it is growing very quickly, the fact that you have numerous kinds of challenges, different kinds of challenges. For instance, if you look at a place like Sweden, almost 94% of the operations there, financial operations, are digital. The reason for that is everybody is at a particular level of literacy, both financial and otherwise. Not the case in India. In India, you have people at different levels of literacy. Secondly, you have a demography where you have a large number of older population and a very large number of younger population. So, our challenges are one of a kind. And if you're looking at all of that, I would believe that it is important for us to have the scale to be able to address these.
Okay, before we move on to our next theme, just one small clarification. A lot of investors would have invested in many of these banks that are now part of the SBI family, the SBI fold. What happens to their shares?
They get swapped into SBI shares.
So there is no loss or gain?
Absolutely not. No. There is no loss at all. Yes. Absolutely.
Okay. One of the biggest challenges for all banks, certainly the State Bank of India, have been non-performing assets. Bad loans worth 9.64 trillion rupees are choking the system. And public sector banks have bad loans to the tune of 6 lakh crore rupees. That's one of your biggest challenges. The government has now been proactive. They are trying to they are getting an ordinance through on non-performing assets. Do you believe that it's the biggest defaulters who need to be targeted first?
See, it's like this. First and foremost, public sector comprises 70% of the Indian banking system. Therefore, obviously, if there are non-performing assets in the system, public sector will have a majority share there as well. It's nothing to do with being public sector. It's a fact that the public sector is still the biggest entity in commercial banking. Secondly, public sector has also been in the forefront of infrastructure building. And that is all correct, because if you look at India today, if you land in any of India's airports today, you'll feel very proud at the state of the airports. The reason is that, well, money has been spent from the public sector side as well in order to build that infrastructure. Yes. It is the same case with power, it is the same case with roads, it's the same case with ports. Having said that, why did we get this non-performing assets? One, of course, is the fact that there was a time when there was explosive growth. As a result of that explosive growth, there was a lot of pushback because there was a feeling that resources were being allocated without transparency. Okay? And as a pushback to that, a lot of things came to a standstill. A lot of resources that were allocated got cancelled. So, all of the assumptions that were made while lending, they went haywire. Right. That is what has resulted in this entire systemic issue coming to the fore.
But so, there are defaulters and then there are willful defaulters as well.
But willful defaulters are only a small percentage of this.
Thousands of crores across.
No, it isn't thousands of crores across. Actually speaking, if you go down to the willful defaulters, it'll all come down to 4, 5, 6, 10 accounts. But the majority of what has happened is not willful default. It is default on account of the fact that, as I said, the land acquisition didn't come through on time, licenses given were cancelled, mines that were given were taken back. There were various such other policy issues because of which the whole thing got stopped. Not only that, India was growing at 8.5. The assumption was that we would go to double-digit GDP growths, and accordingly capacity was put in. However, instead of going to 10.5, we came down to 4.5. And then you are still expecting that the kind of cash generation that was anticipated if the GDP had gone to 10.5 would happen at 4.5. Didn't happen. That, in turn, made these borrowers, made it difficult on their part to be able to service the bank loans that they had taken in order to add capacity. Now, having said that, even today, many of these accounts that have been classified are still operating. So they have units that are still working, that are still producing cash. However, the amount that they are producing may not be sufficient to cover the interest that they are accruing. Yes. So we need to do a reworking. We need to do a reworking in the sense we need to write down equity, we need to write down debt, bring it to a level where the unit will be able to sustain it, so that, they can get proper support for their working capital. Everybody will have to do it. The promoters will have to do it. Some of the banks will have to do it. The losses could be temporary in nature, in the sense that as these units begin to pick up in a proper manner, today if they are classified, the banking system is not able to support them with working capital. If they become sustainable, the banking system would be able to support it again. Not only that, if you look at all the macro parameters in India, we are on the verge of another growth cycle. So as that kicks in and the capacity utilization of the existing resources go up, you will find that their ability to give more and more back will get enhanced. So whatever write-downs we take currently may not be permanent write-downs, may be something that which we may be able to claw back to some extent.
A settlement scheme of sorts.
It has.
In terms of getting non-performing assets to perform again, settlement schemes you believe is one option. What about loans being transferred to asset reconstruction companies? There has been some problems with this because there are legal issues as well.
See, what we really need to do is to get the NCLTs, which will actually implement the bankruptcy law, working in a proper manner as quickly as possible. Today, the issue is that while the NCLTs have been set up, the infrastructure around the NCLTs is yet to come up. You need, for instance, something called an information utility that will be able to advise the NCLT what is the outstanding loan of a borrower, what are the covenants that the borrower has accepted, what is the state of the security that is there behind these loans, immediately as soon as NCLT asks for it. Because if that cannot happen, then the period that has been given for resolution of the asset, which is a maximum of 270 days, that period cannot be adhered to. Okay. So I would say going forward, the way out for India is to ensure that these NCLTs become efficient dispensers of resolution processes, and this is something that we need to get done as quickly as possible.
The finance minister just a few days back said he was focusing on just 40 to 50 big corporate borrowers would solve the crisis quickly, whereas earlier you seemed to indicate that there are larger conditions, there are larger reasons why people have not performed in terms of returning what was due to them. Do you believe in SBI that you need to go after 40 to 50 big corporate borrowers? Actually,
it's not a question of going after anybody. It's a question of resolving the big ones, okay? And as I said, the big ones also, it is not a question that they have all willfully defaulted. Very unfortunately in India, NPAs are immediately associated with criminality. That's not the case. There have been NPAs world over and resolution processes world over. If you look at the US, if you look at China, if you look at the UK, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, I can name a host of other countries which have had these kind of cycles. And these cycles are normally, it's a boom and a bust cycle that always happens. But we do have to have certain systemic ways of resolving these. When the finance minister talked about the 40, 50 large ones, if you look at a bank like us, 50% or rather 47% of our NPAs pertain to the 50 top accounts. So obviously if we are able to resolve these 50 accounts, half of our NPA issue goes away. Right. So therefore it does make sense to concentrate on the top ones, to get a solution there, and then try to see how we resolve the ones down below.
The top ones you're talking about are not necessarily all willful default.
No, not at all, not at all. There would be only 10% of those who are willful. The rest are all caught in situations because of which it has become like this.
But as far as the willful defaulters are concerned, and I ask you this because there is an element of overwhelming criminality in so many of these cases, how aggressively will the State Bank of India, using the new ordinance, be able to go after willful defaulters?
No, I don't really know what will be the nature of the ordinance. Unless I know the nature of the ordinance, I can't really tell you. But frankly, even today, going after willful defaulters is something that is already laid out. So I don't really think... No, it's been difficult. See, the fact of the matter again is you have to really prove that this thing is a case of willful default, that money has been taken away. And for that, you have to go into the courts. Now, to go into the courts takes time. And because, the courts obviously have to hear both parties and then come to a conclusion. And that obviously takes time. But I would say, the problem is less on that side than on finding systemic answers to what has really happened. I think it is really not appreciated the kind of impact certain decisions and certain issues have had in India. When you are talking about setting up a power plant and it is done on the basis of captive coal being available and suddenly the coal mine is no longer there, how do you ensure that the commercial viability of that entire thing is still there? Yeah. So, you have to understand that there have been happenings in India that has led to where we are. And it is not always dependent on a person's ability to execute or otherwise. Also, it is a fact that, during the boom period, everybody was setting up power plants. So people who were not into power at all felt that this is something they could do. At that point of time, it seemed to be a good thing to do. But when the challenges came up, these people were very poorly placed to take up these challenges because they were from a sector that had nothing to do with power. Right. So these are things, these are what called, irrational exuberance of the times, which also have led to this. Added to this, there is a question of management bandwidth. Maybe in certain places, management bandwidth was not sufficient. So you have to take
scrutiny of loans dispensed.
I do not think, it is a question of scrutiny of loans because, again, if you look at it, the entire system has lent to them. And it is not true that only the public sector has lent to them. There are very many private sector operators who have lent to them. And the fact is, maybe there were one or two private sector players who were not into corporate lending at all. Barring them, the rest are also into this as well. So I do not think it is a question of scrutiny. It is a question of understanding that there was a systemic issue. And the quicker we understand that, the better we will be in a position to take on the resolution of these.
Okay, ma'am, demonetization, the media's favorite question. It's been, 6 odd months since demonetization happened. A lot of that cash, in fact, a large amount of that cash is back in the system right now. In hindsight, ma'am, do you believe it's worked? It's worked as a policy in widening the tax base, in bringing in a lot of cash into the banking system. And does that benefit actually balance out a lot of what we've seen of people suffering, the poorest of the poor, unable to work without cash when cash wasn't available? There have been pros and cons. Your views on demonetization?
Well, if you ask me, I will try and answer only from the banking system side because, frankly, about revenues and tax nets, you should ask the government. Yeah. From the banking side, I think there have been two very signal positives. One, of course, is the fact that, our lendable resources have gone up hugely. When we started this entire exercise, there was a feeling that much of the cash that's getting deposited will flow out the moment the curbs on withdrawal are taken away. That has not happened. And therefore, if you look at all of the banks, most of the banks have improved their lendable resources position, thereby enabling the banking system to actually reduce lending rates. So that's something that is...
That's an important point. The cash which has come into the system is flowing within the system. It's not being taken out.
That's right. That's right.
So that's important because the worry was that if the cash wasn't in the banking system, then it was going in for potentially for black money and things like that. So you've got the cash. It's all white, it's all legal.
That's right.
And people are earning off that money.
That's right. That's right. And as I said, it's had the very good impact of lowering rates of interest. Okay?
Yes.
So that's the one big thing. The other big thing, I think, is the adoption of digital modes. If you look at the way digitalization and the adoption of digital ways of transacting was going on in India, during the demonetization, for instance, even simple things like usage of debit cards went up 450%. Now, once cash has come back in, it has come back to around 300% more than what it was during.
And it remains 300%.
Yes, that is the good thing. So, work that we would have needed to have taken maybe 3 years to get people to accept digitalization has actually been done in 60 days. So that is actually enormous. And also
what percentage, ma'am, of money you mentioned remains within the system? Have there been some massive withdrawals which have taken place? You're saying
they haven't
Can you give
been.
us a number or a statistic?
I would say around 55-60% of the cash we received is still in the system. Okay.
And so that enables you to continue lending. And
that's right. And again, as I said, the kind of, for instance, out of the debit cards that were being used for ATM transactions, only about 23% of our debit cards were getting used in POS machines. Today, about 49% of the debit cards are getting used in POS machines. So you can see the kind of shift there has been, all in the space of 60 days. As I said, to get the same shift in normal times, probably we would have needed 3 years. So 3 years of effort to get people to adopt digitalization has actually been done in 60 days. So that is actually enormous. Also the kind of innovations that have happened during this period. You got the Bhim app during this period. You got the Aadhaar-enabled payment services during this period. So, necessity has been the mother of invention over here as well. And you've seen a lot of digital activities actually take root during this period. So I think overall from the banking system, yes, we went through very difficult times. I will not deny that. But I think the payback is also quite substantial.
So, ma'am, in conclusion, the goal is to be as close as possible to a cashless society in the future. That's perhaps unrealistic. But do you believe that a less cash society, which is pretty much the goal, has already been achieved to a large extent?
I don't think it has already been achieved, but I do think that several very good steps have been taken towards it. The reason why we need a less cash society, especially in India, is to ensure that people who are today excluded from the financial services, they get included. Now, frankly, if you do all of your transactions in cash, when you need money, I won't be able to lend you because there is no track of what you have done. The moment you start transacting so as to leave a trail as to your transactions, that trail will enable me to lend you because then I know how much you're getting and spending. Now, for the very many millions of Indians who are there today and who are not able to access the financial system, getting into an account and transacting through the accounts is very important to enable them to leverage when they need the money. The second thing is, if you are going to bring down corruption, the best way is to have a less cash society because corruption needs cash. Because otherwise, there is always a trail. So if you're looking at a large country like India and you want to make things less corrupt, more transparent, more inclusive, less cash is the way to go. And therefore, I would say that this is a big move towards it. We have achieved it. No, we haven't. We have still a long distance to go. But definitely, it's the step in the right direction.
Well, ma'am, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us.